While the EU froze $156 million in aid, and the United States blocked another $100 million, Tanzania's debt nears 65% of GDP, and President Samia admits the country's global image is battered. Amid this mounting pressure, Russia steps in with an unexpected economic lifeline. What drives an external power to approach a country at the exact moment when traditional funding flows begin to recede and diplomatic pressure intensifies? And what could this move indicate about broader shifts in regional power balance? For decades, Tanzania has built its international position by navigating between multilateral partnerships, aid programs, and external financing, a path shaped since the post-independence period by the need for development, political stability, and integration into the global economy. Yet this history also created a structural dependence on financial institutions and Western partners, something analysts have long suggested as a vulnerability factor for East African countries when political tensions or disputes over rights and governance arise. In recent months, unusual pressure signals have accumulated, with decisions reported in sources such as EU freezes €156 million aid to Tanzania amid post-election rights concerns, and Trump aid freeze to hit Tanzania civil society hard. Report suggesting a deep reassessment of Tanzania's relationship with the European Union and Washington, raising the central question of this analysis. When traditional financial support mechanisms are suspended almost simultaneously, does this merely represent a temporary disagreement over domestic policies, or could it indicate a broader shift in how these partnerships are conducted? Tanzanian leadership has publicly acknowledged that the country's international image has been affected, opening space for a less obvious question. How do states respond when access to international funding becomes restricted, and what alternatives are explored behind the scenes of economic diplomacy? It is within this historical context of dependence, pressure, and the search for autonomy that reports of new actors offering cooperation in strategic areas such as trade, space technology, and investment begin to emerge. As described in Russia backs Tanzania's drive for trade, satellite, investment-led growth, prompting a deeper reflection on continuity and disruption. Is this a natural extension of Tanzania's foreign policy of partner diversification, or a sign that the geopolitical chessboard in East Africa may be entering a more complex phase of realignment? At the center of this emerging dynamic is Russia's recent engagement with Tanzania, which analysts suggest could signal a shift in influence across East Africa. While Western aid has been constrained, reports from Russia backs Tanzania's drive for trade, satellite, investment-led growth indicate that Moscow is offering support in areas that may strengthen economic sovereignty without attaching conventional political conditions. What motivates this timing, and could it be interpreted as a strategic calculation to expand influence in a region traditionally aligned with Western partners? Observers note that economic lifelines focused on infrastructure, trade facilitation, and technological investment may allow Tanzania to stabilize its domestic agenda while exploring alternative partnerships, raising another critical question. How might such a move affect Tanzania's negotiations with global financial institutions and the EU? And could it recalibrate perceptions of leverage in broader East African diplomacy? Analysts believe that the significance of Russia's approach extends beyond immediate financial relief, potentially setting precedents for regional engagement where aid and investment are offered as instruments of strategic partnership rather than conditionality, a contrast to previous Western frameworks. Could this development encourage other nations in the region to consider diversified partnerships? And what implications might this have for long-standing economic and geopolitical alliances? The discussion increasingly turns to interpretation of long-term impacts. If such cooperation continues, it may reshape trade patterns, investment flows, and diplomatic interactions across East Africa, suggesting a layer of complexity that requires careful observation. As the interplay of national interests, regional stability, and external influence continues to evolve, the implications of Russia's engagement with Tanzania extend into economic and technological dimensions that analysts believe may influence the broader East African landscape. By supporting initiatives in trade, satellite technology, and investment-led growth, as reported in Russia backs Tanzania's drive for trade, satellite, investment-led growth, Moscow could be offering alternatives that bypass traditional Western-dominated financial mechanisms. What does this suggest about the flexibility of Tanzania's development strategy, and how might such alternatives alter the calculus of regional power? Observers point out that when traditional aid is withheld, countries often explore new sources of capital and expertise, prompting questions about the potential for increased autonomy and the ability to pursue national priorities with less external constraint. Could this shift also signal to other nations in the region that diversifying partnerships might mitigate dependency on Western funding? Analysts note that the interplay between securing immediate economic relief and maintaining long-term strategic positioning is delicate, raising further inquiry. How might Tanzania balance the benefits of rapid investment against possible geopolitical friction with long-standing partners? As the discussion unfolds, the focus moves to interpretation of the wider consequences. If other East African countries observe successful engagement outside conventional aid frameworks, could this influence regional cooperation structures, trade alliances, and perceptions of leverage among global powers? The evolving scenario invites ongoing analysis, suggesting that the full impact of such engagement may only become clear through a combination of economic indicators, diplomatic negotiations, and strategic responses over time, emphasizing the importance of context, interpretation, and measured observation. Analysts also explore the potential ripple effects of Russia's approach on Tanzania's internal economic and political landscape. By facilitating investment and technological projects without attaching conventional political conditions, Moscow may be creating a model that could allow Tanzania to pursue development objectives with greater discretion, as highlighted in Russia backs Tanzania's drive for trade, satellite, investment-led growth. What does this indicate about the evolving expectations of external partners? And how might this shape the country's negotiating position with multilateral institutions and neighboring states? Observers suggest that such engagement could encourage other East African nations to consider alternative partnerships, prompting a re-examination of regional dependencies and strategic alignments. Could this signal the beginning of a broader trend in which countries in the region leverage multiple sources of support to enhance autonomy? And what challenges might arise in balancing new partnerships with existing commitments? Analysts believe that understanding the nuances of these interactions requires careful attention to both economic metrics and diplomatic developments, raising the question: how might shifts in investment flows and technology transfers affect long-term regional competitiveness and integration? As this scenario develops, it may redefine traditional assumptions about influence and leverage in East Africa, suggesting a complex interplay between economic necessity, strategic opportunity, and geopolitical signaling that warrants close observation. Finally, as the broader context is considered, analysts highlight that Russia's engagement with Tanzania may not only influence immediate economic recovery, but could also have strategic implications for regional dynamics. By providing support in trade, investment, and satellite technology without imposing political conditions, as reported in Russia backs Tanzania's drive for trade, satellite, investment-led growth, Moscow introduces a new variable into a landscape long shaped by Western aid and influence. What questions arise about the adaptability of East African nations in responding to shifting external support? And how might this reshape perceptions of power and opportunity across the region? Observers suggest that such moves could encourage a more multipolar approach to partnerships, prompting nations to reconsider long-standing dependencies and explore diversified avenues for growth. Could this development indicate a gradual recalibration of alliances, where economic incentives and strategic considerations intersect in ways that may alter conventional diplomatic patterns? Analysts believe that monitoring the interplay between domestic priorities, regional cooperation, and external investment is essential to understanding potential trajectories. The evolving situation leaves one open question for reflection. How will Tanzania and its neighbors navigate a landscape in which traditional support frameworks are challenged? And what broader lessons might emerge about agency, influence, and strategic choice in East Africa?